Jesus is dead. At least, that's what I'm convinced of. But if you're a Christian watching this, you've probably heard skeptics say things like that without defending it very well. After all, it's one thing to poke holes in other people's arguments, but quite another to do the heavier lifting of providing your own. So in the spirit of doing just that, because I think it's important, consider this from philosopher Michael Martin. 1. A miracle claim is initially improbable relative to our background knowledge. 2. If a claim is initially improbable relative to our background knowledge and the evidence for it is not strong, then it should be disbelieved. 3. The resurrection of Jesus is a miracle claim. 4. The evidence for the resurrection is not strong. 5. Therefore, the resurrection of Jesus should be disbelieved. Now, my purpose here is not going to be to provide an in-depth defense of this syllogism, but rather to use it as a potential way to argue against the resurrection. Starting with definitions, miracles are popularly conceived of as violations of the laws of nature, but sometimes people get too caught up with the rigidity of the term law. So for our purposes here, think of the phrase violations of the laws of nature as equivalent to violations of very well-supported generalizations about how nature operates. To start with, if you're convinced that no deities exist to violate the laws of nature in the first place, then you're obviously not going to put too much stock in miracle stories. But as Martin correctly points out, the prior probability of miracles is extremely low even if we assume that God exists. It is important to see that the initial probability of the resurrection would be small even if theism were true. If theism is true, then miracles in this intervention sense are possible, since there is a supernatural being who could bring them about. But it does not follow that such miracles are more likely than not to occur. Indeed, relative to background beliefs that are shared by atheists and believers alike, for example, belief in the uniformity of nature, miracles are rare events. This is a crucially underappreciated point, because sometimes believers act like establishing theism should make people flock to Christianity, which is a really bizarre attitude if you ask me. Well, that covers premise 1, that a miracle claim is initially improbable relative to our background knowledge, but what about the others? Given the definition of a miracle, premise 3, that the resurrection of Jesus is a miracle claim, is trivially true, so that leaves us with 2 and 4. Here's 2 again. If a claim is initially improbable relative to our background knowledge and the evidence for it is not strong, then it should be disbelieved. I think most people can see the intuitive appeal of such reasoning. If we recognize that a claim is very improbable, then it follows that the kind of evidence we would need to overturn that initial improbability should be pretty darn good. Anything less than meeting that demand seems to open one up to a naive gullibility. And that just leaves premise 4. The evidence for the resurrection is not strong. I realize that this is going to be the most contentious premise. So what ways are there to argue for it? As one potential example, here's Matthew Hartke using the discord between the resurrection accounts.
Regardless of what we say about the reliability of the Gospels more generally, the resurrection narratives are in a class all their own, and they're an absolute mess. Now, this is usually the point where apologists try to turn this bug into a feature by claiming that the minor discrepancies between the accounts should actually increase our confidence in the core historical claim of those accounts. But in this case especially, that's a genuinely terrible argument. Because as any interrogator worth their salt knows, what you're really looking for when interrogating witnesses and trying to get to the truth is corroboration without collusion. You want the stories to agree as much as possible, but without showing any sign of dependence on each other or copying each other to get their stories straight. But if the witnesses can't even agree on such basic things as the murder weapon or which zip code the murder happened in, and yet on other details they're repeating each other's sentences almost verbatim, nobody in their right mind would think that that should increase our level of confidence in those witnesses when they happen to agree on the identity of the murderer. So when the gospel writers can't even agree on where the risen Jesus appeared, on who he appeared to, or on what, if anything, he said when he appeared, why should we consider them to be reliable witnesses to anything other than the desires of the gospel writers themselves?
Damn, that's a spicy meatball. So what are your thoughts? Is it a good argument? Let me know in the comments below. And make sure to check out this video if you're interested in some reasons to doubt the existence of a God who would raise Jesus from the dead in the first place.